I hope you are all using the CyCon app. If you are not, check the Century. The password you will find either in your email or at the walls, talking about the app. Now the Cyber Commanders panel. One bad and one good news. The bad news is that General McLaughlin had to cancel his visit. Good news is that Major General Hockenhall from the United Kingdom was gracious enough and quick on his feet to take his position. Thank you very much, James, for that. Yesterday, the center had an honor of hosting and facilitating a Cyber Commanders Forum, Cyber Commanders from 11 countries. I understand that was actually their second meeting in history. Of course, that underlines again how important the international cooperation and human contacts are when it comes to cyber. We have an excellent panel today with Vice Admiral Coustillier from France, with Brigadier General Vollmer from the Netherlands, and with Major General Hockenhall from the United Kingdom. I will ask some very broad questions from all three of them and ask, in the same order as mentioned, you to limit your presentation to roughly 15 minutes, and that would then leave us a good lot of time to have a discussion afterwards. What I would like to ask you from the outset, all three of you, is, first is a very simple and broad question: what you do? What does your organization do? What is done by the military? What is done by other government services? Secondly, that your countries are developing offensive cyber capabilities. This is a very diverse audience here. Could you please explain to this audience how they should feel safer because of that? And the third question is what we have heard all morning already, domain and NATO. So if the heads of state and government will declare, recognize cyber to be a distinct domain, fifth domain of warfare, what does that mean? What does that change in NATO? What it should change in NATO? How do you prepare for a coalition cyber operation and whether countries will contribute to it? I think, of course, there are so many other questions related to the same topic. But without further ado, I would ask first Edwin Coustillier to take the floor, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. At the beginning, I was Admiral Coustillier. I was in charge of cyber defense for the French forces since 2011. Sorry for my very bad English, but I am a true French native speaker. I have to answer very quickly to the first question. What is my job? My job is digital combat, like other combat components. It is a pleasure for me to be here again this year for the CyCon in Tallinn. I would like to thank the CCOD COA for having me on this stage along with your close partners. This year is a very specific year for France, very challenging and very decisive. The 13/11 Paris attacks brought terrorists our soul. Our president says that France is at war. French forces are at war around the world, mainly in Africa and also in the Levant area. And this war also finds ramifications in cyberspace. Daesh has good skill in defending their information system and a real expertise in digital media. They develop also hacking techniques, but at the moment at a very low level. They are massively present on social networks in several languages and use it to spread its violence and propaganda, recruit new members, and gather new funds. Daesh has a real strategy in cyberspace. In their ideology, digital jihad is as important as traditional jihad. In cyberspace, as in any other domain, we have to take back the initiative against Daesh, ACMI, ACPA, or Boko Haram. It's the same face or the same ideology. They use the same assets. I speak a lot about Daesh because France is in war, but also I not forget also all the other threats, and mainly that are state-sponsored, mainly from your great neighbor for the East. Following Paris attacks and a new boosted budget for cyber operation with the military programming law, we are building up a new structure at the French Ministry of Defense. The structure will be current with your main partners. We are proceeding very quickly, but step by step. And we should end up with a complete, unified cyber command in the next months. This is a result of all the work that has been done in the past 6 years to recognize in France cyberspace as a new domain and to deploy our troops on this field and obviously to implement operational process and a true full spectrum targeting process from non-kinetic up to kinetic. So far, the French Ministry of Defense effort for cyber can be summarized with a single figure for the 2014-2019 period, €1 billion invested in equipment. As an example, the main power of the CADID is my cyber defense center for defensive purpose only, is growing by a factor of 8 times during this period and will supervise all the different security operating centers that we have been created inside the Ministry of Defense and all services. This strong and fast evolution is also passing by setting up new structure and organization, like a digital space operations center in charge of preparing, synchronize, and driving defensive and offensive cyber, as well as information digital operation. With this center that I am able today to exercise the charge of operational control of all the military cyber operation for France. We also starting recruiting your first people for your national cyber reserve, aiming for 400 people, operational experts and team manager, and a pool of more than 4,000 young engineers able to be deployed in case of major cyber crisis in your homeland. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General. Hans?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for providing me the opportunity to speak here and provide some insights on the Dutch situation. And according to what Admiral Costiero already said, what is my job? Well, it's digital combat as well. Ladies and gentlemen, cyber operations are not special nor unique. It's something new. Modern society and contemporary armed forces are depending on well-functioning digital networks and systems. Various threat actors, however, are willing and capable to exploit system and networks vulnerabilities to attack and harm our society and our armed forces in, by, or through cyberspace. Consequently, this dependence on IT also influences military operations. It's the cyberization of military. In warfare, information has always been key. In modern warfare, the complexity of the information is increasing, characterized by volume, velocity, veracity, and variety. Information about your location, your allies and your enemy's location, information of targets, stocks, plans, movements, it's all essential information for military commanders. And also the information in weapon and sensor systems. All these are also equipped with digital controllers. They're vulnerable as well. And because of the digitization and the value of information, information itself is a target. Our systems are vulnerable and our potential opponents will make use of it. Digital components are often cheap and easy to get. even less technological advanced opponents will have the ability to harm our systems. Cyber threats could come from traditional opponents, but also from new actors. State actors or non-state actors, such as Syrian Electronic Army, Cyber Berkut, Cyber Caliphate. But they will also use digital components to communicate and share information themselves. They are as dependent and vulnerable as we are. The responsibility for a more secure cyberspace lies with all players in the global information society, from individual people to businesses, organizations, and governments. Cybersecurity measures must be balanced with social and economic growth and freedoms. The Netherlands has chosen to further develop its military cyber capabilities, not only for defense and protection against the existing and future threats, but also as an operational military capacity. In the Defense Cyber Strategy from 2012 and the update of the strategy in 2015, we first focused on strengthening and hardening the cybersecurity and enlarged the cyber intelligence capacity. Currently, we are building up the operational cyber capacity. Within the Netherlands Armed Forces, the cyber capacities are under command of various organizations. The cybersecurity and cyber defense units to protect our IT networks are the responsibility of the Joint IT Management Organization. The cyber intelligence role is executed by the Defense Intelligence and Security Service. Military police is responsible for law enforcement, for cyber law enforcement, and for the operational capacity, which includes the offensive capability. The Netherlands Defense Cyber Command has been established. The mission of the Cyber Command is to contribute to the freedom of maneuver in cyberspace and to the fighting power of the Dutch Armed Forces by the preparation, training, and deployment of operational cyber teams. These teams will provide integrated military operational cyber capabilities in support of the Dutch Armed Forces in the full spectrum of military cyber operations. They will plan, coordinate, and execute as part of a joint task force cyber operations, from defensive cyber operations to offensive cyber operations, with direct effects or supporting effects. And I just told you that there are different bodies within the armed forces with a cyberspace responsibility. Next to the obvious roles, protection and intelligence and operations just mentioned, we identified a coordinating role for all .PMFL factors as well. And my command coordinates and facilitates the cyber activities and capabilities within the Dutch MOD and with military and civilian, national and international partners. Furthermore, the command has to attain, disseminate and manage cyber expertise for the whole Dutch Armed Forces by contributing to education, training and exercises. Regarding cyber operations, in the Netherlands, we defined 6 different versions. Some comparable to what allies have defined, some are new. And I give you the 6 just as a thought. Cybersecurity operations. They encompass passive and defensive measures and focus on protection, prevention of damage, and, if needed, restoration of the broad range of IT components. Cybersecurity measures form a baseline guaranteeing freedom of action and effective use of cyberspace by our armed forces. Basically, it's the use of firewalls, intrusion detection systems, monitoring of network traffic, etc., etc. You all know it. But you have also defensive counter-cyber operations, actions to neutralize active threats within your own network. In general, this is about proactive countermeasures with a defensive intention, which are taken for detecting or obtaining information about cyber intrusion, a cyber attack, or impending cyber operations, or for determining the origin of an intruder's operation. So DCCO does not extend beyond the Netherlands MOD perimeters and is generally aimed at terminating specific adversaries' malicious cyber activities to preserve the ability to use friendly cyberspace capabilities and protect networks and systems and the data therein. Some adversary actions or preparatory actions can trigger us to actively defend networks or systems outside the perimeter of Netherlands MOD networks. These are called offensive counter-cyber operations, military cyber operations executed in response to adversaries' attack, exploitation, intrusion, or other effects of malware, including launching preemptive and preventive counter-operation against the source of that threat. The fourth kind of cyber operations are cyber intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance operations. Cyber operations at a lower level which have the sole purpose of collecting general data or information regarding other actors' activities in the cyber domain. This does not include the activities of the Defense, Intelligence, and Security Service. Supporting cyber operations are small-scale operations in support of other, most tactical level activities in peacetime, crisis, or conflict situation. Due to its versatility, SCO are particularly useful in relation to support the information warfare capacities, psychological operations, deception, operation security, lawfare, and electronic warfare. And last but not least, offensive cyber operations. These are combat operations, either supporting an operation in another domain or executed in cyberspace only, originating from, passing through, or having effects in cyberspace to achieve a military objective. Because in a military operation, you are planning to achieve a certain effect, to support an activity in the physical domain to achieve an ultimate military goal. And physical offensive actions taken within military operations are needed to affect the capacities of an opponent within the operation and to give commanders the opportunity to gain success in their mission. So weapons are used to achieve military objectives. Nothing new. This applies also in the digital domain. That is why the Netherlands includes the option of offensive cyber actions in military operations. With cyber operations, we are not introducing anything new. They must be integrated in military missions and become just another tool in the toolbox of the mission commander. When developing military offensive capabilities, we should focus on using it against legitimate targets and mitigate negative collateral effects, which means that emphasis should be put on planning, decision-making, logging, testing, training, and so on. Until now, NATO has made considerable progress in the efforts to integrate cybersecurity into its planning processes, but more needs to be done. The recognition of cyberspace as a domain at the next summit in Warsaw will give the opportunity to enhance the robust and resilient cyber defense capabilities, which are required to support missions and operations. Adding cyber capabilities to NATO's doctrine will increase its power in modern and future warfare. The Netherlands doesn't see any legal restrictions to recognize cyberspace as a domain. The current national and international legal framework is applicable to cyberspace as well. The consequences of recognition will be mainly conceptual and doctrinal. Because cyberspace is integrated within the physical domains, it will also have implication on doctrines in these domains. And for sure, cyber operations will need a set of dedicated ROEs. They should be integrated into the standard set of ROEs. In my point of view, it's not required that NATO will develop its own offensive cyber capacity. A number of member states are developing cyber capacities, and like other offensive capacities, for example, fighters, armored brigades or frigates, cyber teams or units could be part of force contribution to a mission. The decision to participate with a cyber team to a mission is a national political decision. Cyber is considered as an integrated and integral capability of the Netherlands Armed Forces. The Netherlands Forces usually operate in a multinational environment. Military cyber operations should be planned in a combined and/or joint environment using regular decision-making and operational planning processes. Given that threats are multifaceted, civilian and military approaches in protecting critical cyber assets must be strengthened. These efforts should be supported by research and development, for example by the Netherlands Defense Academy, as well as closer cooperation between governments, private sector and academia. Greater defense cooperation also means breaking new grounds with respect to planning, acquisition, training, and logistical support. And it means that we must align our collective requirements and national priorities. It means that we should not shy away from innovative and creative partnerships in and outside NATO. Here a next step is required. We should stop talking about cooperation. In this field we need each other and we should get it going. Nobody can do this alone. And cyber, it is nothing new. It's something new, it's not something special. So that what we are used to do in the other domains, we should do in cyber as well. Thank you for your attention.
James.
As the more observant of you will have noticed that I'm not Lieutenant General Kevin McLaughlin from US Cyber Command. He sends his apologies for his inability to attend today, and I hope you accept me as a poor substitute on his behalf. So my name is General Jim Hockenhull. I work in the United Kingdom's Joint Forces Command, and my job title is the Director of Cyber, Intelligence and Information Integration, which is something of a mouthful. So because we love acronyms in the military, that's abbreviated to DCI-3. The problem is that no one can ever remember what DCI-3 stands for. My function is to command and direct the UK military cyber forces to maintain force elements at readiness and to plan and integrate cyber operations into our military operations. I also lead our capability development across all lines of development, so in training, education, personnel, information, doctrine, organization, infrastructure, and logistics. And the aim being to create an integrated and complete cyber military capability. And I'm the senior responsible owner for our defense capability development program within the cyber domain. Of course, none of this is possible as an independent entity within the UK government. This is executed in partnership across government and with agencies in order to make sure we have the most coherent capability for the UK, and for the UK to then offer that capability when engaged on military operations in partnership with others. I also lead the Ministry of Defence's cyber policy development within the UK Ministry of Defence, across the UK government, and with our international partners. All of which comes together to explain why I was attending the conference, and then to be surprised that I'm sat here talking to you. In the UK Strategic Defence and Security Review announced in November last year, the roles of the UK Armed Forces in cyberspace were restated. Firstly, to have strong cyber defences so that we can maintain our freedom of manoeuvre. Secondly, to project power in cyberspace, just as we do in other operating environments. Thirdly, to assist in the event of a significant cyber incident in the UK or with allies. And fourthly, to respond to a cyber attack, just as we would respond to any attack, using whatever capability is most appropriate, which may include cyber operations. In structural terms, the Strategic Defence and Security Review created a new organisation, which is the Joint Cyber and Electromagnetic Activity Group, known as the JCG. Why? Because we love acronyms. This has a one-star commander, and he works to me. And what we've brought together is our military cyber intelligence, and our electronic warfare capabilities together into a single organization in an attempt to bring coherence across both cyber and the RF spectrum to ensure that we've got the most capable military support possible. Now, in our Strategic Defence and Security Review, the United Kingdom government allocated £1.9 billion to a national level capability development programme, over the next 5 years. And this builds on £600 million allocated to the UK's National Cybersecurity Programme from 2010 to 2015. We will also create a UK National Cybersecurity Centre later this year in an attempt to simplify our existing structures across government, to ensure that we can share information more effectively, and also to manage incidents in the UK. And for the Ministry of Defence, we will work closely with this centre. If you add the spending which core cybersecurity spending is executed within government departments, in addition to those national programmes, those activities to protect our networks and ensure safe and secure online services, the UK government's total cyber spending will be more than £3.2 billion over the next 5 years. Now, our greatest challenge within the military, and I would imagine this is similar across other areas, is to attract, recruit, train, and retain a highly skilled cyber workforce. Now, we are refining within the military our cyber career stream, and we're testing all new recruits joining the military for their cyber aptitude. And we're also developing our reserve capability. And it's in the reserve where I believe we're able to add capability to our forces. Our reserves come from the cyber industry, from academia, and from former members of the military. They bring significant skills with them, and they require little or no training. And we can offer them demanding and interesting employment. These are not part-time servicemen and women, but these are extra-timers. They bring extra benefit to our forces, and they also gain skills and experiences which enrich them, which they can also then take back to their employers. In 2015, the Global Information Security Workforce Study estimated that a global cybersecurity workforce shortage will widen to about 1.5 million by 2020. Now, against that context, we have a significant challenge. Henry Kissinger wrote that for most of history, technological change unfolded over decades and centuries of incremental advances that refined and combined existing technologies. Even radical innovations could, over time, be fitted within previous tactical and strategic doctrines. Tanks were considered in terms of precedents drawn from centuries of cavalry warfare. Airplanes could be conceptualized as another form of artillery, battleships as mobile forts, and aircraft carriers as floating airstrips. But what's different today is pace. And it's this revolution that extends to every level of human organization. In the military, we're often accused of preparing to fight the last war. And then, when engaged in conflict, we adapt our force in being to transform it into the force that we need. Now, this approach requires time, but the pace of the information age offers us no such luxury. Network technologies are an intrinsic element of our lives, and with that comes vulnerabilities and opportunities. But from those vulnerabilities, threats emerge. This means that for the military, cyberspace is an operational domain. George Osborne, the UK's Chancellor of the Exchequer, said, "We need to ensure that our military are equipped to fight the wars of the 21st century. That means they must be prepared for hybrid conflicts, played out in cyberspace as well as on the battlefield. A 21st century military has to operate as effectively in cyberspace as it does on land and sea and in the air." Our commitment to 2% of our gross domestic product spent on defence means that the UK can invest in a military which is cyber-trained, cyber-secure, cyber-enabled, and with the ability to fight in every domain of future conflict. We need to be able to defend ourselves from all threats, and the UK government has sent out a clear message that we will defend ourselves. But we will also take the fight to those that seek to do us harm. We are stepping up our defences and the means to ensure that attacks on Britain are not cost-free. The ability to respond is a vital element of defence. This takes us to deterrence, which is too large a subject to cover in these brief remarks. But But a crucial element of deterrence will be to establish norms in cyberspace. I note there's a workshop on this later today. We must ensure that we destroy the idea that there is impunity in cyberspace. And those nations that mean us harm need to understand that we will defend ourselves robustly and that we will have the means to do so. We've clearly stated that we will use our capabilities in a responsible way and in accordance with international and humanitarian law, and we support the development of international norms of behavior. Kissinger again said, "It will not be possible to conceive of international order when the region through which states' survival and progress are taking place remains without international standards of conduct." I've already mentioned the UK's approach to cyber as a domain of operations, and we are encouraging NATO to adopt this framework. Doing so will bring significant benefit. It will allow coherent planning and integration of cyber into mainstream NATO operations. It will help improve cyber defences and enable and sustain freedom of manoeuvre. NATO is at the heart of UK defence policy, and we want to play our part in developing and maturing NATO's approach to cyber defence. Allies, including the UK, should secure their cyber defences through capability development, capacity building, education, training and exercising. Bringing those nations together through training, together on exercises such as Cyber Coalition and the CCD-COE Lock Shields exercise are great examples of working together to promote common tactics, training and procedures. As our understanding matures, these concepts will be able to be codified into doctrine, and this will enable all NATO nations to work more effectively in and through cyberspace. Now, I would conclude with a vote of thanks to Sven and the CCD-COE for their work in developing our thinking on these issues. But I would note that there are those that would seek to turn problems and issues into competition. But what I would ask is that we all focus on solutions. Government, military, industry, academia, in a dynamic and demanding partnership to achieve success for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, James, and thank you, the panelists. And James, thank you also reminding us about the maze or jungle of acronyms that military people are so fond of. Before joining CCD-COE, I was working in MOD for nearly 2 decades. So that jungle is very well known to me. My favorite acronym in NATO glossary, official one, is I don't think that we use it anymore. It's no fun, N-O-F-U-N. Do you know what it means? So no first use of nuclear weapons. And thank you also, James, for pointing out the norms development, which is, I think, a very important part of a legal and policy work in the future. Those of you who are heavily interested in the matter, at the CCD-COE booth outside, we have books also on international norms development, which we published, I think, 2 months ago, which is a collection of articles on norms development. Maybe a couple of pointers looking back at the future, what NATO has done when it comes to cyber. I mean, as you know, NATO until now is only concentrating on its own military networks. What will happen? Probably it will be changed after the Warsaw Summit. But at the Wales Summit in 2014, 2 very important declarations were made by the heads of state and government. First was that international law does apply to cyberspace, which in a way was a vindication at the highest level possible to the work facilitated, funded, and organized by the CCD-COE called the Tallinn Manual process, where the international group of experts have come together and looked at the existing international law and its applicability into a cyber conflict. And the group is working now on the 2nd volume of that. It will be published by Cambridge University Press at the very end of this year, at the very beginning of next year. I think that will be a major event. Stay tuned to that, especially if you are a lawyer specializing in international law on cyber. The second monumental decision by the Heads of State and Government at Wales was that cyber attacks can become grounds for Article 5, collective defense of NATO, which, of course, is I would say, the logical continuation of a previous part that international law does apply also on the cyberspace. I think this is so basically, in terms of where NATO has developed in last years, I think those actually were conceptually very big decisions. Now, moving to a domain, and I think conceptually everyone agrees that cyber is a domain. And we have done that research a long time ago. In 2009, there was actually one paper submitted to CCDCOE and CyCon with a title of Information Sphere Domain by Patrick Allen and Dennis Gilbert, who argued that cyber is a distinct domain of warfare. They were looking at what does it take to be a domain. Now, when we look at what does that mean for NATO in the future after Warsaw, can I ask you, the first question is, whether, in your opinion, NATO will have, in some foreseeable future, a cyber component command? Let's say we have an air component command, we have a naval component, maritime component command, we have land component command. If cyber is a domain, would that result in that? And I will kick on in the same order as we were speaking. Anyway, please.
Please. I think I was not very politically correct. My answer is no. Why no? Because I think that I think we don't put under the command of NATO some offensive capacity. And I think that it will be very important that NATO recognize cyber as a new domain. But when you are dealing with a cyber operation, you are dealing on the first step in order to protect. You have to protect your assets. What are the assets of NATO? The assets of NATO are the internal NATO assets. It is obviously is not NATO that have to protect the French infrastructure, of the French military infrastructure, of the French submarine, of the French aircraft, because we can share intelligence, we can share the threat, we can coordinate the procedure. On the other way, is a little bit like for the special forces. We can, inside NATO organization, to be clear on targeting process, to be clear to define the objective, to be clear to define the effect of cyber supporting NATO operation. For that, we have to define some targeting process and to define how to integrate in the special forces, how to integrate cyber support to NATO operation. It's different to create a component. And for that, I believe that we are not clear today to give to NATO the responsibility of through component, like we have a maritime component, air component, or something like that. For me, it's too soon. I think it's each nation, when we have to use cyber supporting operation is very sensitive. It's very difficult to use and to have the guarantee of the effects. But this is my personal answer.
Rich?
Well, actually, I fully agree with the previous speaker when we speak about today or tomorrow. But the day after tomorrow, I'm not sure. I think when we look 2 or 5 or maybe 10 years ahead, it might change. And warfare in cyberspace or in the information domain will become more and more important. Will become more crucial, maybe even more crucial than warfare on land, sea, air, or space. And then it might be needed to have a cyber command within the NATO command structure. I don't know. So not now. Right now, I do not expect, and in future, I do not expect neither that NATO will develop its own operational capabilities. It will make use, as I stated before, it will use the capabilities of member states, but to command it, yeah, it might need a organization, but not in the foreseeable future. And in cyberspace, the foreseeable future is very short.
James.
I suppose in order to make it interesting, I should disagree with both of the other panelists. I think we've got a real challenge. And the real challenge is that we're trying to do two things that might seem mutually incoherent. It's almost like in 1984, George Orwell wrote about doublethink, the idea that you can have two thoughts in your head at once which are mutually incoherent, but you can honestly believe in both of them at the same time, which is a difficult thing to do. But in this space, I think we're talking about acknowledging cyber as a domain, and our usual way of process would then be to say, well, if we acknowledge it as a domain, then we'll build a headquarters, and we'll make sure that we give it the right level of focus and attention. But within the cyber domain, we also need it to be integrated into all of our operations. So the idea that cyber will stand as a discrete entity, and that will be responsible for cyber warfare in some description, and it's in some way separate from operations in land, sea, air, space, I don't see as credible. So we've got two competing pressures, and believing in a domain I don't think necessarily takes you to the idea that it automatically means more structure, more organizations, more generals, more admirals. Not that having more generals or admirals is necessarily a bad thing, although it probably is.
More admirals, yes.
So my view, I think, is that that we're still in the foothills of some of this thinking. So I wouldn't like to leap to a conclusive answer on a future structure or not. But we need to have a rigorous debate around what this domain is going to mean, so that we can understand what the implications will be. But my instinctive thought is that I recoil at the idea of creating ring-fence structures which take on responsibility, which means that in some way cyber is someone else's responsibility. And everything we've heard from the opening remarks in the keynote speeches before coffee, and what we've heard in the remarks from the other members of the panel, is that this is an integrated activity. And we should be wary, and we should really test the benefit we would accrue from creating a new structure. We should test that against the damage that might do to a kind of integrated effect of where we need cyber integrated across all of our operations.
Thank you very much. I will now open the floor to questions. Raise your hand, you'll get a microphone. Please state your name and affiliation, and if applicable, ask from a specific panelist or then all panelists at the same time. Who would dare to ask the first question? I can ask a first question for sure. This is going to be an easy one. Hans, and very well, we have another one here in a second. But let's start from you, sir.
Brigadier General Duchesne, Netherlands Defense Academy. I was intrigued by your comments, and I'm very well aware that it is for the discussion's sake that you disagree with your two colleagues. But listening to your answer, springs to my mind that there are services and commands dedicated to a domain, like land, air, naval headquarters, and so on. So, and they quite often operate in an integrated and a joint way. And if I listen carefully to your response, it seems to me that you have a different set of way of organizing and coordinating the cyber capabilities with the other services. So am I right in that impression, or are you hinting in some other direction? And do you, as a consequence, foresee the end of dedicated headquarters dedicated to the other domains as well? Because you seem to stress integration, which sounds very reasonable. Looking at your job description, sounds very reasonable to me.
Okay, so military personnel are very well known, I think, for being decisive, even when they don't really understand. And I'm going to perhaps act out of type and say, I don't know. I think what I do know is that I think things are different. And the idea that we would automatically default to the same way of doing business that we've done previously in how we've organized ourselves, I think that to slavishly adopt an old way of doing business in a new paradigm, I think is a dangerous thing to do. Now, having a cyber command may turn out to be the right thing to do, but at the moment, I'm not convinced that that necessarily is the right way to go. I don't think that because of that change, necessarily your follow-on proposition, drawing perhaps what you saw as an inference from my remarks, that therefore other forms of headquarters all have the sell-by date and should all go. I don't necessarily think that's true either. Inevitably, in military terms, we can't have a sort of an anarchic operation where we take it in turns to be in charge. There needs to be some structure in order to enable military operations to be effective. But I'm very open to the idea that cyberspace may challenge our ways of doing business, and a kind of a 19th century style construct or a 20th century style idea of componency may not be the right thing as we go forward. And I think that we, as the military, government, academia, industry, we should all be engaged in that sort of debate in order to make sure we understand what the implications of this will be. Where we make problems for ourselves is where we draw some form of historical analogy and try and fit that historical analogy into our current circumstances and into the future. It's a bit like map reading at night. When you're map reading at night and you get yourself a little bit geographically dislocated, you look at what you can see and you convince yourself that it fits to the map, and you can work out exactly where you are. What we need to make sure we do is we don't take a conventional way of doing business and take that forward into what may well be an unconventional future, because we may find ourselves in a difficult place. So it's a long answer to your question, which is really, I'm afraid I don't know. But what I do know is that we've really got to think hard about this rather than reach for an easy solution of just doing what we've always done.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else want to chip in on this issue? No?
Just a point on the organization. But when we are speaking about unified French cyber command, it is a very specific organization that will be very, very, very integrated with all the other domains. And we can separate cyber for the other domains. A part of the cyber can be used independently, mainly the offensive, or is a little bit like special operation. But all the other part is fully integrated with the other domain. And and today in France, you know, we have a new Pentagon. So the name is a French Balargon. In this new French Ministry of Defense, we have a specific building mainly for the operational matter. In this building, we have all the services: Navy, Air Force, Army, Space Command, intelligence, supporting military, special forces. And in this area, we have an area for cyber. All the G3 are working all together. And this is a guarantee that the cyber command will fully integrated with all the approach of the military. This is a global approach. And we have in mind to define global effects and cyber takes place, defensive and offensive and digital psyops.
Thank you very much. Hans, you touched upon the collateral damage in your opening statement, saying that we'll be very careful, train and experiment carefully and so forth. But I mean, looking at the collateral damage or cascading effects, whatever we name it, let's say if we are affecting a target with a bomb, it's well measured, the collateral damage around it. If you use the cyber effect to the same effect, meaning that you are affecting the target not with a bomb but with a code, how do you define and measure that? Because that might not be necessarily limited to this surrounding. Is there a conceptual way what you have been wrapping your heads around?
Well, first, I think we should try and do our best, as we do in conventional warfare, to limit the damage and to try to avoid collateral damage. And that's the same as so far. And that means that by developing a cyber capability, you should be very careful in the design. You should log what you're doing. You should test it. You should make a risk assessment. So if you build your malware or whatever kind of offensive capability you design, you should already in the design phase make sure that collateral damage is not possible. And that is the large difference between a military offensive capability and, for example, the way criminals act. They don't care. They just send out a phishing mail to 1 million people and get reaction from 1% of those. And so on and so on. You know all about that. So I think that there is not a real difference between the physical domain and the cyber domain here. And you should be also taking into account what is exactly collateral damage. Is collateral damage that there is somewhere a piece of software left in a system, or is, and what is actually is collateral damage, is that there is a loss of civilian life, injury to civilians, damage to civilian objects, or a combination thereof. That qualifies as collateral damage, and not just a piece of software somewhere left.
James.
So I think we've seen over the course of the last century and the early years of this a focus on precision of the execution and delivery of military effect. The difference, I think, in addition to those comments, is that cyber has a temporal distinction. So where a kinetic strike has a finite nature to what it does, it destroys what it destroys in place. But of course, there's the opportunity with cyber effect of gauging the duration that effect might take place. So there's a temporal dimension which may, in fact, enable us to be more precise with the use of cyber effect. Now, that's not to say there aren't the sorts of challenges which have been alluded to in terms of cascading effects, but with the appropriate rigor which we apply to our kinetic targeting, applying the same level of rigor to our cyber operations, we have the possibility, I believe, of being more precise in time than perhaps we're able to be in the kinetic space.
I think I fully agree with you, obviously. But one important fact is the tempo effect. The tempo is more important because when you cyber attacks is not using an arm, cyber attack is building a capacity. And we need to have time to build this capacity. And we need to begin cyber operation some weeks before the final effects. And this is a very different approach and we have to be able to deal with this on the targeting process.
Right. Any questions from the audience? Please, here in the second row, lady. Microphone, please. Wait for a microphone, please.
Thank you very much, Generals, for being here with us today. My question concerns definition. We see many definitions in national strategies of cyberspace, often defined as a network system. My research at Harvard University focuses on control systems. I'm very interested in knowing whether you consider control systems, whether it be water, power, electric, nuclear, a different domain or treated differently from cyber, and whether or not you incorporate in your own command, in your own definitions, control systems alongside of cyber, or whether it's treated distinctly. Thank you very much.
Who would like to pick it up?
Well, the answer can be short.
Yes.
There's no distinction. Control systems are part of cyberspace. All digital systems are, whether they're connected to the net or not. And yes, we look at control systems as well in my command, because weapons and sensor systems do have control systems on board as well. And if I can do something there, I can prevent the opponent of using those systems.
It's exactly the same in France at the level of the governmental agency, at the level of the Ministry of Defense. When you have an IP address, you have the cyber and more than.
So in terms of definition, I think I would agree, and we look at not just our networks, but also our weapon systems and platforms and the risks that they potentially are exposed to. But perhaps not a definition within cyberspace, but as I said in my opening remarks, we're seeking to ensure that we don't bound ourselves to a sort of IP space, but in fact, many of our systems potentially have vulnerability, which may be through the radio frequency connections in the RF spectrum, as well as through IP. So we need to be very broad in our understanding of where our vulnerabilities sit and how those vulnerabilities might be exploited, and therefore how we must seek to try and protect them.
Hans.
And actually, your question brings me to something else. And that is, when NATO is recognizing cyber as a domain, I think one of the first questions to be solved, or first issues to be solved, is the definition question. That we all agree to the same definitions, and that we're all, when stating something, think about the same thing and talk about the same thing. So basically that will be an advantage, an early advantage of recognizing cyber as a domain, that we talk about the same things here.
Thank you. Let's move to deterrence. Whether deterrence works in cyberspace. Let's say deterrence in a kinetic world, or let's say in nuclear warfare, means that of course you need to show your opponent that you have a capability. You conduct a test. You need to show that you are able to deliver the effect. You conduct an ICBM test. Meaning that your ability to deter by striking back has to be credible and demonstrated. Now, James, you briefly touched upon the question of deterrence in your opening speech by saying that one part of the answer is in enormous development. Meaning that this is something what kind of international community does not allow some specific ways of behavior. Of course, the deterrence can work through denial, can work through being able to deny the opponent of anonymity, meaning attribution. It can mean striking back in kind and in time of your own choosing. Is there anything else? How does it work? And in the cyberspace and looking, future domain and all that. James, please, could you start from you?
Okay, so, I mean, this is, I think we're still in the kind of foothills of some of the debate around deterrence. And I think we again, it goes back to a remark I made earlier, perhaps, that we need to not fall into the risk of kind of lazy analogy, of thinking that we can take a model of a particular type of deterrence and we kind of drape that over cyber. And whilst undoubtedly there are lessons to be learned, but there are undoubted challenges. The asymmetry of cyber creates challenges in terms of deterrence. I think there are a range of broad issues which we're as yet in the absence of this plays into the broader debate onto norms and behaviors of trying to construct a concept of deterrence in the absence of any degree of order is an incredibly difficult debate to have. So I think those two elements are going to have to advance in parallel in order to enable us to understand the deterrent effect that we can have. But undoubtedly, I think from our perspective in the UK, you know, our cyber capability is part of a broader deterrent effect. It is part of our full spectrum approach. And we, as any nation would, reserve the right to use those means at our disposal in order to counter those that mean to do us harm. And the possession of that broad range of capability has a deterrent effect. And cyber plays, and will play increasingly in the future, a part in that.
Fully agree.
Thank you very much. Questions from the audience? Do we have? There's one hand in the very, very back. Two, yeah. Let's start from one and then take another one. We'll take you both. Don't worry.
Hi, good morning. My name is Sergej Buka. I'm a researcher at Leiden University in the Netherlands. First, thank you very much for the 3 great presentations. I've got 2 questions, one for Admiral Coustelier. I think it was last year, April 2015, that there was a large cyber attack, a hack on TV5, whereby several TV channels were forced offline for a few hours. Unprecedented, I think it was in media landscape. And all fingers pointed to Islamic State, Daesh, in the first days and weeks. But 3 months later, it appeared that it was actually a Russian-based advanced persistent threat that was responsible for the hack. And I was wondering how this has affected thinking in Paris. My second question is for General Hucknall. And if I understand correctly, a lot of technical, or all technical capacity still resides in Cheltenham. And I was wondering how the military ensures that it gets its fair share of what it needs, considering that there sometimes can be conflicts of interest between intelligence and the military, with the military wanting to destroy or influence an operation, and intelligence maybe wanting to keep the source intact to use it for future operations. Thank you.
Very much. Start with Arnaud, please.
For the first question, I am not able to give you the answer because TV5 is not under my responsibility. But on the open source, yes, we are speaking about APT28, and some reports suppose that APT28 was linked with Russia, but it's only reports. But so it is interesting because APT28 we have many indices or many clauses of this sort of attacks. I think that every day in some open source publication we are speaking a lot about APT28. So this was very interesting. It is interesting also to discuss about APT 28 regarding to the deterrence, how to deter APT 28. It is interesting how to deter cybercriminality. This is an important way. To deal with the intelligence, in France now we are working of intelligence-oriented cyber. What I mean is the intelligence that that people who are working in the cyber cell need to conduct their action. And we have a doctrine for that. And these are in charge of or give them some directives to different intelligence services in order to give us this sort of intelligence. Also, this sort of intelligence is a very, very dual intelligence because a large part of this intelligence was published in open source or in live company like Cipatec, Kaspersky, or other one. And this intelligence is very, very, very large. And for us, the most difficult is to have the capacity to exploit all the information and to take the more accurate clues concerning or regarding Ministry of Defense is this very large, big amount of intelligence and information.
So James, a tricky one on who's and how will decide between the intelligence gathering and operational needs.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. A really, really helpful question. And I'll try and do my best. So firstly, I'd start by saying that the partnership between Cheltenham and the UK military is closer than it's ever been. That's evidenced by the fact that I co-chair some programs with staff from Cheltenham in order to achieve a national effect. What I would say is that, of course, the challenge isn't different. This isn't unique to cyberspace. The challenge of doing something or not doing something where one action may be disruptive to activity in a different area is something that we face all the time. It's true over any source of information and any action that we might want to take. And it's crucial that when we do this, that we observe problems from a variety of perspectives. So it's very easy when confronted with a particular activity, and I want to take an action, to limit my perspective to the context of that action in isolation, and then to make judgments. But actually what we need to do is to observe those problems from a variety of perspectives. And we need to be able to step back and see that problem in context in order that we don't do something as a short-term imperative which actually creates a longer-term problem. And I think that the partnership which we have established with our colleagues in the agencies now means that we're much more able to have a full and frank discussion than ever before, and there were full and frank discussions in the past, but now it's based on a much closer relationship that enables us to have those debates and to be able to understand the perspectives and imperatives across the board. So I think my answer is that I recognize the challenge, but as with all challenges, the closer the relationship and the closer the partnership, the easier it is to overcome those individual issues, ensuring that regardless of your proximity to that problem set, that you're able to take yourself into a variety of focal lengths when you look at that problem, from being close up to the problem, but also to be able to zoom out and look at the broader context.
Thank you very much. And we will take the last question. There was another hand at the very, very end, 2 hands before up.
Hello, my name is Gail Kim. I'm a performance auditor with NATO. I just want to say thanks again for your participation in this panel discussion. It's been very informative. My question is more of what your views are, and it's not specific to anyone, but your views on currently, we talk about information campaigns or disinformation campaigns by third-party groups like, let's say, ISIL. And then you also have attacks on, let's say, GPS and cell phones. So you have information warfare, you have spectrum warfare, and then you have cyber domain discussions. So my question to you is, should there be some sort of discussion or consideration on the convergence of these kind of three seemingly disparate disciplines into some sort of common approach or discipline or doctrine? And if so, to what extent does NATO play a role in that?
Very well. I start. Who wants to pick it up? Any volunteers?
Well, it is a ongoing discussion, at least also in the Netherlands, about the development from cyber domain into information domain, into influencing operations, into the question how to tackle the hybrid threats on information. And basically, cyber is a small part of that. And as you stated correctly, there are many more information-related capabilities which you should bring together either virtually or in an organization. And you should look at it in an integrated approach, which means cyber can contribute to your PsyOps operation. You can, by defacing a website with very simple action, you can achieve an effect, a PsyOps effect, and it might not be activated by or instigated by the cyber guys, but by the PsyOps guys who ask the cyber guys to help them. And the same applies for EW, and actually the fact that in UK, the EW and cyber is now in one unit shows that, yes, we have to look into that, and it will be part of the NATO discussions as well.
James, no?
No, for us, for the moment in France, we have not a lot of doctrine debate, but we are mainly using all assets on a more pragmatic way and with a very big global approach. Depends of the level. If you are on the theater, if you are on the field, you have a complementarity on cyber and electronic warfare and PsyOps. If you are at the strategic level or a operative strategic operation producing tactical effect, you can use a little bit the same. It's not very clear, but we are using all the assets on the pragmatic way in order to produce an effect. The main concern is to define what are the effects what we want to produce.
So I think picking up on the Admiral's last comment, that it's all about the integrated effect. It's about what you're seeking to achieve. We can have endless debates over organizations and structures and a whole variety of arcane, rather pointless discussions, or we can start from the point of saying, what are we seeking to achieve? And how are we going to integrate those effects in order to maximize our achievement? So it would be remiss of us to think that we're having a cyber effect or an information effect and that somehow these are isolated from each other. So we've got to focus on the integrated effect, and then we should allow the sort of the principle of form follows function. So let's work out what we're doing and the function we're seeking to achieve, and then let's enable the organization to be created to enable that effect to take place. And I think if we start from the other end of having a discussion around our structures, we run the risk of solving the wrong problem. When actually what we need to be focused on is how we're going to have effect, both in operational terms and in defensive terms, within cyber and the broader domain, how those integrated effects are going to be achieved, and then how best we can organize and structure ourselves to be able to realize those effects.
Thank you, James. Form following would, I think, be a very good guide for us in the future. I would now give us an opportunity to say some closing remarks on whatever topic you would like. So basically speak up now or be ever silent until the next year's CyCon, when we will be going to have again, the Cyber Commanders panel. Let's start with a reverse order, James, from you. Is
Okay.
there anything?
Damn, I was rather hoping we were going to go in the same order, which would give me some time to think. So I think I'd probably conclude by saying two things. Firstly, a shameless advert for a cyber symposium, which we're going to hold in the UK on the 19th and 20th of October in London in partnership with RUSI, looking at cyberspace and the transformation of 21st century warfare. And I hope many of you will consider the opportunity of joining us. And that plays to my final point, which is that this is all about partnerships. So this is not about cyber commanders expressing views. This is about partnerships which we execute within our own nations. And we in the UK draw upon the world-class capabilities of others across our government. And by being able to work in partnership across the UK government, we're able to generate the sorts of effects that we believe we need for operations now and into the future. But that partnership is not just within the government, but that partnership is with industry, with academia, with anyone that has a voice to play, a voice to raise in the debate, and a part to play. And that partnership is so important. So events like this, and events like our symposium in October, are really important, but also is the kind of day-to-day engagement with individuals. The thinking in this area is still immature. And there is the opportunity for all of us to play our part in shaping that future. But we do so in partnership. And I would ask from a UK, but also from a NATO perspective, that you reach out to us in the same way that we will reach out to you in order to engage in that debate, to ensure that we get the right outcome as we move forward. So partnerships, to me, is absolutely the key for our operations in the military domain, but in our broader cyberspace, it's all about partnerships. Thank you.
Very much. Well, I couldn't agree more. And partnerships and cooperation is key in this. We can't do this alone. We need nationally and internationally work together. And actually, we need to do something together, which means that we have to take real steps by exchanging information, by cooperating in programs like MNCD2 and MCDC, like exchanging personnel, like defining the cyberspace, and at the end, or maybe at the beginning, recognizing cyberspace as the fifth domain, as the domain where we work in. And realize that it is not something new, it's not something special, it's something new. Which means that you shouldn't be afraid of it. You should realize that we have gone through this already a number of times, and now we're looking ahead to a new road. The only thing is the pace of it. It will go much, much faster than any development in the past. And that means that we have to react faster as well, and that we do not exactly know where we stand in 5 years. And maybe in 5 years we look back and say, hey, what we've done so far was not correct, we need to go another way. And that's not a problem either, because we're learning by doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's difficult for me because I fully agree with my fellow. But my conviction after 5 years in my office, in my job, that now cyber is really a new component. But this new component we have to learn, to combine and to integrate with the other one. Sea, Special Forces, Air Force. But the core of the approach is the effect-based approach. And this is, I think, is a key of the structure, the key of all the organization of the of this component. And also the other point is the multicultural approach. Sometimes cybersecurity with too many technical. Cyber defense is multicultural. We have to put in the same place civilian and military, and to put people from intelligence, people from cyber technical security, and through operational people was able to manage all the operational process, targeting process, and something like that. And the other challenge, is the main challenge is the human asset and the human skill. And this will be the main challenge for all the cyber defense structure.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for the closing remarks, and thanks, Hans, for reminding us the pace of change we are witnessing. When you look back into the history of humankind, then let's say the revolution which was came through the application of fire, took many hundreds of thousands of years to reach, the whole of mankind, or most of mankind. The agriculture revolution took a couple of thousands of years. Industrial revolution took 100, maybe a couple of hundreds of years. Now we are looking already in decades. Things are changing rapidly, and I think this has been a very exciting panel. Thank you, Rashad. It's exciting because we are at the beginning of a new road. Whether the old concepts way of looking at things apply, we do not know. And I think this is, makes this a really exciting topic to have been here. Before, I would ask the audience to launch into applause in thanking the three cyber commanders. Two housekeeping things. First is, when you are going to have lunch, take your stuff, take your bags and papers, because the rooms will be rearranged. As you know, the morning sessions we have keynotes, in afternoon sessions we have free breakaway sessions. So take your stuff, otherwise, it's hard to locate it later. Second is, of course, be back at 1 hour's time, 1:30, in your respective room where you want to listen to one of the breakaway sessions. But now, gentlemen, thank you very much. It was a really good job what you did. Thank you. Thank you very much. Hans? Some basil into your life? And more basil? Thank you very much. Excellent.